Now, you probably know what the Bill of Rights is, but did you know that there is a parental Bill of Rights? Hey, everybody, welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number. I'm Stephen, and today we're flipping the script a bit. I'll be the one asking the questions to Sarah.
Finally, my chance to get grilled.
Well, last week we spoke a lot about parental influence over schools. Sarah, did your parents take an interest in your education?
Oh yes, I had a very involved mother. We even built Mesa Verde one time out of graham crackers, peanut butter, and pretzels. So she did make me do all my own science projects, but there was a graham cracker Mesa Verde that was floating around. And my mom is actually really good friends with my librarian from elementary school, who I did that in her class with. It was the media class. And I was just with her a couple of weeks ago when we were on one of our biking trips. They were going to Mesa Verde, and Miss Hull, shout out to Miss Hull, was like, "Do you remember that crazy thing that you turned in the fourth grade?" And looked over at my mom, and I was like, "I told you that was beyond my abilities as a fourth grader."
Yes. Yes, I think we all have stories like that. But I remember spending one weekend creating it was some kind of cell. So we ended up producing this nerve cell out of cardboard and coloured bits of paper.
Cool.
It's fantastic. School loved it. I think my daughter lost interest in it within about 5 minutes, and it was just me there for hours making this and colouring and designing the cell.
I love it.
So the Parental Bill of Rights, of course, is about parents taking a much more direct influence in school, in how schools are run and what's taught and so on. Now, in England, that's already a thing. We've had the idea of parental choice and parental involvement has been a big thing for decades, really. So the way schools work here is every school has a governing body, and there are a number of different people on that governing body, the head teacher, obviously, but also parent governors. So I was a parent governor. So the parents can elect a couple of representatives who go along to the governor meetings and so on, and are involved in the management of the school, and can sort of input into them and so on. I mean, it tends to be a little bit cursory, because most of the important decisions, of course, are made by the people who actually know what they're talking about. So the educational experts, the actual head teachers, and the various other teachers, and so on. But it was an interesting experience, talking about school budgets and where the money should be spent, that kind of thing.
I'm sure it comes as no surprise. My mom was on ours, the PTA. I don't actually even know if, back when I was in school, if the PTA was that much more than just being involved in school activities. Like, I remember the PTA doing things like the bake sales and helping with field day and these kind of, bigger school events, and parents who, again, were wanting to be involved with the school and involved with like the upbringing, but I don't remember there ever being anything, kind of similar to maybe even what you were doing, but definitely what this Parental Bill of Rights is kind of advocating for, of parental influence and over what we were learning or other things like that. Did you guys do a lot of that? Is that kind of what you were talking about at these meetings, or what was kind of the substance there?
That's what I hoped it would be about. So it was primary school, and it's a Catholic primary school. So I was very keen on actually getting involved in what was taught, and I was a little bit suspicious that they'd be teaching a load of religious stuff at the expense of reading and writing and arithmetic and so on. But actually, it turned out it was a very good school, and they didn't do that. But certainly, whenever I tried to intervene, even though I at the time I was working for the Department for Education in curriculum policy, so I like to think that I knew what I was talking about. I still got very short shrift in meetings. People would largely ignore what I say and just sort of move on and so on. But I did get to sit in on some maths lessons and talk to maths teachers and things like that. So it was quite interesting in that respect.
That's interesting. It's funny because, as much as I do think that you knew what you were talking about, I actually feel like I like that you were treated that way, because the teachers know, like they're there, they're the subject matter experts. Like I do really believe that of our educators. So I have to laugh a little bit, but I'm sure that was frustrating.
There was a very clear hierarchy.
Yes.
and that was right. I'm sure in other schools it might have been different. I know there were schools, our school was doing very, very well, but there were schools that were struggling, where very strong, forceful sort of governors had played quite an important role in trying to turn them around.
That's good. Nice.
Okay, well, back to business then. We're diving once again into the Conservative playbook for reforming government known as Project 2025. So, Sarah, can you just give us a quick reminder what this project is all about?
Absolutely. So, as we explained in our last episode, Project 2025, formerly called the Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise, is a massive policy guide created by the Heritage Foundation. It's a detailed 800-page blueprint, and it aims at guiding a second Trump administration through its first 180 days, and was crafted with input from over 300 experts, backed by more than 100 conservative organizations, and outlines specific policies for every government department, as well as a myriad of policy, radically changing how the government works.
It sounds pretty comprehensive. So what are the main goals of Project 2025, according to Kevin Roberts, the Heritage Foundation's president?
Yeah, Roberts highlights 4 major fronts. First is restoring family as the core of American life and protecting children. Second is dismantling the administrative state to return self-governance to the people. Third is defending the nation's sovereignty and resources against global threats. And finally, securing individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls the blessings of liberty.
Very interesting. So, given its significance, it seems like Project 2025 could have a lot of impact were Trump to win a second term. Well, let's talk specifically then about one of the initiatives that's in Project 2025, the idea that there should be a federal Parents' Bill of Rights. So, Sarah, you've done quite a lot of digging into this. So what does a federal Parents' Bill of Rights entail?
Yeah, the Parents' Bill of Rights is a really interesting item to kind of look into, and it's something that I've been kind of keeping my pulse on for the last few years, and I started seeing some bills with this type of terminology in it in Bill Track 50, a lot more commonly the last 3 years, but I've been seeing them over the last 10 years, and it's always been something kind of interesting. And, like so many of these policy items that we'll talk about, especially with Project 2025, there's a lot of really good intention behind a lot of these. But then when we look a little bit more at what is actually in bills and what's actually getting passed and, how they plan on implementing these types of things, that's when we kind of get into a hairier situation. And so, when we're thinking about this federally mandated one, again, this kind of gets back to our conversations with the ESAs of how are we going to have correct oversight, correct resourcing, and those types of things when we're implementing something, at this federal-based level. And what this Bill of Rights looks to do on a very basic level is change the parental bills of rights, or the rights of parents, to be top tier rights. So the rights that we all kind of view for ourselves of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness kind of stuff of our Bill of Rights as well. Mm-hmm. And it wants to ensure that families can get a fair hearing in court if there's federal policies that undermine their rights to raise, educate, or care for their children. And it would also require the government to meet the highest standard of judicial review, which is known as strict scrutiny. And it's for whenever these parental rights are infringed. These are the ways that these cases would be presented in front of a court, because currently there's a big disagreement about what level of judicial I think they call it judicial specie, that these types of issues fall under. And so it really looks to enshrine the right, but then also put forth the legislative path for people to go down when they feel like their rights have been infringed upon.
That's fascinating. So can you give us some concrete examples of what these parental rights entail? Because I'm not quite clear what exactly parents' rights would be. So can they, for example, just march into schools and tell teachers what to do?
Not quite. So it covers such things as making sure parents have a way to be informed about and influence the curriculum that their teachers are teaching, the materials that teachers are using. So essentially what kids are learning in their classes. It can also involve more of a moral education piece. So giving parents a say over things like sex education. More broadly, I would say that the Bill of Rights for parents tend to give parents more involvement in how schools are run and the decisions made within schools.
I see. So have any states already implemented similar laws?
Yes, quite a few actually. So as we talked about last week on the ESA pod, Arizona leading the way, the pioneer in a lot of these pretty interesting bills. And so back in 2010, actually, so almost 15 years ago, they passed House Bill 2732, which was the first bill to define parental rights and education. They also defined it in healthcare and the upbringing of children. And this bill has really galvanized a lot of other states and this Project 2025 initiative. Utah followed suit in 2014 with a law that specified parental rights in public education, and more recently, Florida passed the Parental Rights in Education law in 2021, which included provisions of greater transparency in educational materials and school policies. Texas also has proposed and passed a lot of bills around this. You talked a little bit last week in their special sessions, and all of these bills that they are proposing related to education, especially trying to get that ESA one across the line. Parental bills of rights have also been a aspect to this, maybe not called that, but pieces of what some of these other states are doing have been parts of these bills. And so they actually enacted 2 bills in 2023 to give parents a little bit more control over the instructional materials, and also to prohibit certain types of library content, which many kind of view as a book ban, but it is allowing for influence over the materials that exist within schools and what schools are using to teach.
So it seems like there's a growing movement around this then. So why does Project 2025 think there's a need for a federal Bill of Rights if the states are already doing it?
That's a great question, and something that is very much, I think, top of mind for them. So the real interesting part about what Project 2025 is proposing for this is at this federal level, they are able to essentially enshrine what this Bill of Rights is and how parents can sue and put their cases through the courts when they want to, bring an issue to a school about something that's happening. Because right now there's a lot of disagreement over what level of judicial prudence these cases rise to. So it's very kind of disjointed. It depends on which state you're in. It depends on, a little bit of the politics in that state. And they want to have this overarching, non-able to be preempted rule on a federal level that there is a parental Bill of Rights, and if these rights are infringed upon, they meet strict scrutiny, and this is how parents can move through the court systems to get these suits kind of processed.
Yeah, so it seems obviously this is a conservative playbook, so the people who drafted this are very much thinking about sort of conservative priorities, such as around sex education and critical race theory and that kind of stuff. But wouldn't it also apply the other way then? So liberals, particularly perhaps in red states, could sue schools for not teaching enough evolution or something?
Yes, that is, generally what you would think that it would be going towards. And, that kind of gets to one of the biggest issues here is that it's the loudest voices in the room with the most resources that are going to be able to get these cases through the courts and be able to bring these issues to the courts and get them resolved. And so, when we look honestly at what our country looks like and how we economically are different between, more liberal ideologies and more conservative ideologies, a lot of the more conservative causes have a lot more money behind them. And so there is a big concern that although you think that this is good for everybody to be able to voice their concerns about how their kids are raised and what they're being taught and wanting to promote the best teachings possible, when we get into this kind of moral piece here, it's morals with the most money kind of will get across the line, which can inherently really affect some of our minority groups and some people who don't have as much resources to devote to these fights.
Absolutely. And isn't there also something to be said for, I think as we touched on earlier, that the experts in the room are the educators, the people who work in schools day in, day out, the head teachers and so on. And that if you allow parents too much influence over schools, you can actually have a sort of a very fragmented experience and just cause loads and loads of problems for the correct functioning of schools.
Yeah, there's a few different pieces here of why this is maybe not the best way to go about this. And one is the expertise of the educators. They are experts in this. They spend their lives doing this. They are, the voices in the room that honestly should have the say-so at the end of the day. But also just the administrative burdens put on schools to comply with these transparency requirements are diverting really key resources from actual teaching. And there's also a risk of censorship of topics like sex education and race that can limit students' exposure to diverse perspectives and, moreover, lead to those inconsistencies in educational standards. And these can emerge when parents opt out of lessons or opt out of complete teaching tracks, like, the creationism versus evolution argument there, which can really impact the overall quality of the education that we can provide our students in the United States as a whole.
It does sound quite problematic. So given these pros and cons then, do you think that Project 2025 is right in seeking to federalize a parent's Bill of Rights?
It's a very complex issue. While prioritizing parental rights can have a potentially positive impact, it can also risk prioritizing the loudest voices in the room with the most money and neglecting these minority or marginalized groups that don't have the time or resources to be, fighting strict scrutiny in federal court. And federally codifying these rights could lead to a lot more legal disputes between parents and schools, which, ultimately are draining the resources. That's, kind of the number one thing that you really cannot argue with. But also, it is going to exacerbate the social and political divisions that we already see in our country and within communities. And balancing parental rights with educational expertise is crucial to avoid hindering the educational process and really investing in overall student welfare.
Well, it certainly sounds like there's a lot to consider. Remember, as the song says, the children are our future. So thanks very much, Sarah, for breaking that down for us. And thanks to all our listeners for tuning in today. Don't forget to subscribe for more Project 2025 coverage. Until next time.
Thanks, Stephen. See you next time, everyone.